The world ended not with a bang, but with a constant, grinding roar. It was the sound of a city being chewed to pieces, of steel teeth on concrete bones. Here, in the damp, chalky-smelling basement of the Basilica of St. Jude, the roar was muffled but ever-present. A monstrous heartbeat felt through the soles of worn-out shoes. Plaster dust, fine as flour, rained down from the vaulted ceiling with every percussive tremor, from the artillery duel miles to the east. Alara Vance didn't flinch. She was a statue of focused calm amidst the chaos, her attention tunneled onto the small, fragile life in her arms. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," she sang, her voice a low, steady hum that barely carried over the din. The girl in her lap, Anya, couldn't have been more than 4. Her skin was a furnace, her breath a series of shallow, rattling pants. Anja's dark eyes, glazed with fever, were fixed on Alara's face, finding an anchor in the storm. With one hand, Alara stroked Anja's matted hair. With the other, she applied firm, unwavering pressure to a thick gauze pad on the leg of a teenage boy. His name was Stefan, and 15 minutes ago, he had been trying to retrieve a tattered football from a courtyard when a mortar shell landed a block away. A piece of flying shrapnel, jagged and cruel, had torn through his calf. He was pale, his teeth gritted, but he watched her with a silent, desperate trust. This was the Viridian Orphanage, a name far too grand for what it was, a last resort. It was a pocket of defiant life, carved out of a tomb, populated by 24 children who had lost everything to the brutal, senseless civil war. They were the only color left in a city, rendered in shades of gray and ash. And Alara, a nurse from a quiet suburb in Ohio, was their self-appointed guardian. She was their doctor, their mother, their storyteller, their shield. Her own life, the one with green lawns and evening news and grocery lists, felt like a story someone else had lived. The rumbling outside intensified, a crescendo that vibrated deep in her chest. A few of the younger children whimpered from their makeshift beds of stacked church pews. Alara raised her voice just enough to cut through their fear. "How I wonder what you are?" Stefan let out a sharp hiss of pain. "It's okay, Stefan," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "You're doing great. Just breathe with me." A sudden, violent crash from upstairs shook the entire foundation. A cascade of debris tumbled down the stone steps leading into the basement, followed by a thick cloud of choking dust. The children screamed. For a single, terrifying moment, Alara thought the ceiling would collapse, but it held. The roaring subsided, replaced by an eerie, ringing silence. Into that silence, a new sound intruded. A shrill, electronic chirp. It was the satellite phone, her last official link to a world that had all but forgotten them. She gently laid Anja on a cot, whispering a promise to be right back. She ripped a clean strip from a bedsheet and quickly showed Stefan's older sister, a stoic 13-year-old named Katerina, how to take over applying pressure. "Keep it firm. Don't let up." Katerina nodded, her face a mask of grim determination. Alara scrambled over a pile of fallen masonry to the small alcove where the phone was charging off a car battery. She wiped her dusty hands on her cargo pants and answered, "This is Vance." The voice on the other end was a world away. It was crisp, clean, and unhurried, insulated from the dust and fear by thousands of miles and layers of bureaucracy. "Miss Vance, this is Arthur Caldwell, Senior Field Coordinator for the UN Humanitarian Relief Effort." Alara felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. "Mr. Caldwell, we need help. I have children here with infections, blast injuries. Our medical supplies are almost gone. The last food drop was weeks ago." "I'm aware of your situation, Miss Vance," Caldwell said, his tone as flat and sterile as an operating table. "That is why I'm calling. A final extraction window for all UN and affiliate personnel closed 72 hours ago. You were on the manifest. You were ordered to be on that transport." "I have 26 children in my care," Alara said, her voice rising despite her effort to control it. "They are sick. They have nowhere to go. I can't abandon them." There was a faint sigh on the other end, the sound of a man being deeply inconvenienced. "Your personal feelings, while perhaps admirable, are irrelevant to official protocol. The front line has shifted. Your position, and that of your occupants, is now officially designated as untenable. As you chose to disregard a direct order, the United Nations can no longer guarantee your safety or provide logistical support." Alara's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like," Caldwell stated, with a chilling lack of inflection. "The supply corridor is closed. By remaining in an active and unsanctioned zone, you have forfeited all official protection and support. We are, for all intents and purposes, wiping our hands of the situation. It's a liability we cannot assume. Do you understand? He didn't ask about the children. He didn't ask about Stefan's leg or Anja's fever. He spoke of protocols and liabilities as if they were holy scripture. You're cutting us off? Alara whispered, the words catching in her throat. You're leaving them here to die? You are the one who chose to stay, Miss Vance, Caldwell replied. The finality in his voice was absolute. Good luck. The line went dead. Alara stood frozen in the ringing silence of the basement, the useless phone in her hand. The roar of the artillery started up again, a distant rumble that sounded, for the first time, like a death sentence. The days that followed Caldwell's call were a slow, agonizing descent. Hope, already a scarce commodity, began to evaporate like morning mist under a harsh Sunday. Alara's first weapon was the satellite phone's email function. She typed out frantic, desperate messages to every UN and NGO address she could find, fueled by a dwindling supply of battery power and a surplus of stubborn fury. To A. Caldwell, un-A, at fieldops.org. From Evance Medrelief at satmail.com. Subject: Urgent medical request, Viridian Basilica Orphanage. Arthur, I am pleading with you to reconsider. I don't care about my own status. This isn't about me. This is about the children. The little girl I told you about, Anja, her infection is worsening. I suspect it's developing into pneumonia. I have no antibiotics left. The shrapnel wound on the boy, Stefan, is showing signs of sepsis. I need amoxicillin, ciprofloxacin, IV kits, saline, and basic sterile dressings. I am rationing our last bag of rice. They are children. Please, for the love of God, don't let protocol kill them. The reply came 12 hours later. It was a single, maddening sentence. 2. Evance. Medrelief at satmail.com. From AGHATLDL. Unher at fieldops.org. Subject: Urgent medical request. Miss Vance, as previously stated, we cannot resupply an unsanctioned position in an untenable zone per UNHCR Mandate 7, Section 4B. Your request is denied. Ilara wanted to scream, to hurl the phone against the stone wall. Hundreds of miles away, in a clean, air-conditioned prefab office at a secure regional base, Arthur Caldwell took a sip of filtered water from a thermos. He was a man in his late 50s with thinning hair and a deep-seated belief that the world, with all its messy, emotional problems, could be neatly organized by a well-written series of rules. Ilara Vance was a messy problem, a loose file that refused to be put away. He archived her email, took a bite of a protein bar, and moved on to a logistical report about fleet vehicle maintenance. The names Anja and Stefan did not register as people, but as unauthorized liabilities. He felt not a shred of malice, only the mild irritation of a job well done being complicated by someone else's sentimentality. Her subsequent emails were met with automated replies citing the same mandate or simply went unanswered. The paper walls of bureaucracy were more impenetrable than any barricade of sandbags and steel. On the fourth day after the call, a new threat emerged, this one made of flesh and blood. An olive-drab technical truck, a heavy machine gun mounted crudely in its bed, screeched to a halt in the basilica's ruined courtyard. 4 men from the local Viridian Freedom Militia jumped out. They moved with a predatory swagger, their AK-47s held with casual menace. Their leader was a man with a face like a slab of granite and cold, dead eyes. This was Commander Borislav. He was the law in this part of the city, a law written daily by the men with the most ammunition. He and his men strode into the basement without invitation. The children shrank back into the shadows. Ilara met them at the foot of the stairs, positioning herself between them and her charges. She was 5'6" and weighed maybe 120 pounds, but she stood as if she were rooted to the stone floor. "Commander," she said, her voice even. Borislav ignored her, his eyes scanning the basement. They settled on the car battery and the small, sputtering generator she used for an hour each night to power a few bare bulbs and her medical equipment. "We need the generator," he said, not asking. "It's for the children," Ilara replied. "For light. For my medical tools." "The revolution needs light too," one of his men sneered, reaching for the machine. "Stop." Ilara's voice was sharp. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension. The man paused. Borislav turned his dead-eyed gaze on her. "You are in our territory, American," he grunted. "Everything here belongs to us." Alara knew that fear would be a death sentence. Pleading would be worse. She had spent months learning the nuances of this place, the strange dance of pride and power. "That may be," she said, looking him directly in the eye. "But this is the Basilica of St. Jude, a holy place. And these are the children of Viridia, your children. When the story of this war is written, do you want to be remembered as the man who stole light and medicine from orphans in the house of God?" She gestured to the wide, terrified eyes watching from the darkness. "Their fathers may have fought for you. Their brothers might be among your men. What will they say when they learn their commander took the last bit of power from their little sisters?" It was an audacious gamble. She was appealing to a sense of honor he might not possess, a concern for a legacy he likely didn't care about. Borislav stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the drip of water from the ceiling. He was calculating, weighing the value of a single generator against the potential for a corrosive story to spread among his own ranks. Finally, he gave a curt, dismissive wave. "It is a weak generator anyway," he spat, turning on his heel. "We will be back. Do not think you are in charge here." His men followed him out, their boots crunching on the debris. Alara didn't allow herself to breathe until the sound of their truck's engine had faded completely. She had won, but it was a temporary victory, and she knew it. Her third antagonist was not a distant bureaucrat or a local warlord, but a man who should have been her greatest ally. Dr. Tariq was a Viridian surgeon, a man whose entire hospital had been shelled into oblivion. He was skeletal, exhausted, and running on a fuel of pure cynicism. He would appear at the basilica every few days, bringing what few supplies he could scavenge and a heavy dose of bitter reality. He examined Stefan's leg, his touch surprisingly gentle. "The infection is deep," he murmured, his brow furrowed. "If we don't get this under control, he'll lose the leg, or his life." He then moved to Anja's cot. He listened to her chest with a battered stethoscope, his face grim. "Pneumonia. Her lungs are filling. Without a broad-spectrum antibiotic, she has maybe 2 days." He straightened up and looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a weary pity. "I found a single vial of ceftriaxone. 1. It's enough for 1 full course of treatment." Alara felt a surge of relief. "Anya?" "No," Tariq interrupted, his voice firm. "The boy, Stefan." Alara stared at him, uncomprehending. "What? Anja is dying? And she will likely die even with the drug," he said, his voice laced with the brutal pragmatism of a battlefield doctor. "She is too small, too weak. Her chances are less than 20%. The boy, however, is strong. The antibiotic will almost certainly save his leg and his life. His chances are over 80%. It is simple triage, Alara. We save the one we can save, not the one we want to save. We do not waste our last bullet on the longest shot." "That is not triage. That is a death sentence." Ilara shot back, her voice trembling with rage. "She's 4 years old. We don't give up on her because it's statistically inconvenient. We are not gods, Tariq. We don't get to decide who is worth saving. And, in this basement, with 1 vial of medicine, that is exactly who we are," he countered, his voice rising to match hers. "This is not your clean, well-stocked American hospital where you can try everything. This is reality. Your sentimentality, your refusal to make the hard choice, will get them both killed. You'll give the medicine to the girl, she will die anyway, and then the boy will die from the sepsis you could have stopped. Is that what you want?" The argument raged, a desperate, whispered battle between hope and pragmatism in the flickering lamplight. For Ilara, the idea of sacrificing 1 child for another was a monstrous, unthinkable betrayal of everything she stood for. For Tariq, it was the only sane choice in an insane world. The paper walls of Caldwell's bureaucracy had created this impossible, horrific choice. They were trapped, and the walls were closing in. The argument with Dr. Tariq ended in a stalemate. He left the vial of ceftriaxone on a crate between Anja's and Stefan's cots, a silent, damning ultimatum, and retreated into the shadows to suture a cut on another child, his disapproval a palpable force in the room. Alara stared at the small glass bottle, a vessel containing both a miracle and an impossible choice. She couldn't do it. She couldn't condemn Stefan to save Anja, or vice versa. There had to be another way. There wasn't. But she had to try. Anja's fever climbed higher that night, pushing her into a state of delirium. Her small body convulsed, and her breaths were fragile, liquid things. Alara knew Tariq was right about one thing. Time was running out. That's when she remembered the old civilian pharmacy, a place called Petrov's Remedies, about a mile away in what was now effectively no man's land. It had been looted weeks ago, but she clung to the sliver of hope that something, anything, a forgotten box of generic penicillin, even expired aspirin, might have been left behind. It was a fool's errand, a desperate gamble born of a refusal to surrender. Leaving Katerina in charge with strict instructions, Alara slipped out into the pre-dawn gloom. The city was a different beast at this hour. The gray light filtered through skeletal buildings, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move. Every gust of wind whistling through a shattered window sounded like a sniper chambering around. The silence between the distant crump of mortars was more terrifying than the noise itself, filled with the scuttling of rats and the groan of stressed metal. She moved in a low crouch, sticking to the deepest shadows, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She crossed streets, in short, breathless sprints, the open spaces feeling like massive, exposed wounds. Twice, she had to press herself into a doorway, holding her breath as the guttural rumble of a militia patrol truck echoed down the canyon of ruined buildings. The city itself felt like a predator, and she was trespassing in its hunting ground. After what felt like an eternity, she found it. The sign for Petrov's Remedies hung at a crooked angle, its letters pockmarked by shrapnel. The front window was a gaping hole. Inside, the place was a disaster. Shelves were overturned, glass crunched under her boots, and empty boxes littered the floor. Looters had taken everything of value. But Alara was methodical. She searched the wreckage with a desperate intensity, her fingers probing through the debris. In a back room, under a pile of fallen ceiling tiles, she found it. A dust, covered but intact box of amoxicillin, long expired, but better than nothing. Tucked beside it was a half-empty bottle of children's acetaminophen. It felt like finding a diamond in a landfill. Clutching her prize, she began the treacherous journey back. She returned to the basilica to a scene of quiet devastation. Her heart seized. Commander Borislav had kept his promise. He had come back. The basement was in chaos. The children's meager belongings were strewn across the floor. Their last few bags of grain had been ripped open, the precious contents spilled onto the filthy ground. The generator was gone, and Dr. Tariq was slumped against a pillar, a dark purple bruise swelling around his left eye, a trickle of dried blood at the corner of his mouth. Katerina was trying to clean a cut on his forehead with a rag. "What happened?" Ilara breathed, rushing to his side. "Your friend the commander was displeased you weren't here to greet him," Tariq rasped, wincing as Katerina dabbed the cut. "He said you showed him disrespect. He and his men decided to collect a tax. I tried to stop them from taking the food." "They beat you," Ilara whispered, her hands clenched into fists. The rage that filled her was cold and sharp. This was the consequence of her defiance. Not just for her, but for those around her. Tariq looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not just cynicism in his eyes, but a profound, soul-deep exhaustion, a surrender. He slowly, painfully, got to his feet. He began gathering the few personal items he kept in a small medical bag. "What are you doing?" Alara asked, a new wave of panic rising in her. "I am finished," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I told you, Alara, this is what hope gets you here. It gets you a fist in the face. It gets your food stolen. It gets your children terrorized." He gestured around the wrecked basement. "I have stayed, and I have watched, and all I see is you delaying the inevitable at a greater and greater cost. You are not saving them. You are just presiding over a slower death. Tariq, don't. I need you. They need you." "No," he said, shaking his head. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "They need a miracle, and I have run out of those. This place, it's a tomb now. I will not be buried in it." He picked up his bag and walked towards the stairs, not looking back. Alara called his name, but he didn't stop. She listened as his footsteps faded, leaving her in a silence that felt heavier and more final than any before. She was alone, truly alone. Her supply line was cut by a bureaucrat in a safe zone. Her sanctuary was violated by a warlord who saw children as collateral. And her only colleague, the one person who understood the medical nightmare she was in, had just walked away, broken. She knelt by Anja's cot. The girl's breathing was now barely perceptible. The expired amoxicillin and the acetaminophen felt pathetic in her hands. She looked over at Stefan, who was shivering, his leg radiating a feverish heat. Between them, on the crate, sat the single vial of ceftriaxone. The impossible choice. The full weight of her situation crashed down on her. The adrenaline from the supply run vanished, replaced by a crushing, bone-deep weariness. She leaned her head against the cold stone wall, the dust, the fear, the hopelessness pressing in from all sides. For the first time since she'd arrived in Viridia, Alara Vance felt the cracks spreading through her own foundation. The fire that had sustained her for so long was dwindling to a flicker, threatening to be extinguished by the suffocating darkness. In the darkest moments, a spark can seem as bright as the Sunday for Alara. That spark came from a place she had long forgotten. Weeks earlier, a freelance journalist, a haggard-looking man with kind eyes named Ben Carter, had passed through her basement clinic. He had been embedded with a militia group that had since been annihilated. She'd given him water, dressed a cut on his arm, and answered his questions for about 20 minutes before he moved on, another ghost in the ruined city. She never expected to hear from him again. But Ben Carter had made it out, and he hadn't forgotten. From a secure location, he wrote his story. He didn't write about troop movements or strategic positions. He wrote about the smell of antiseptic and dust in a church basement. He wrote about a nurse from Ohio singing lullabies while artillery shells fell. He wrote about 26 children clinging to life and the woman who refused to leave them. He had seen the record of her outgoing emails on her laptop. He included verbatim transcripts of her desperate pleas to Arthur Caldwell and Caldwell's cold, bureaucratic dismissals. The story, titled The Angel of Viridia, One Nurse Against the World, was published on a small but respected international news site. Within hours, it was picked up by larger outlets. Within a day, it had gone viral. It was a story of pure, simple heroism against a faceless, heartless system, and the world seized it. Save the Viridian Orphans began trending on social media. Photos Ben had taken of Alara comforting a crying toddler, of the determined look on Katerina's face, were plastered everywhere. The story was a gut punch to a world grown numb to the abstract horrors of war. Suddenly, the crisis had a face. It had a name, Alara Vance, and it had a villain, Arthur Caldwell. The public outcry was a tidal wave, and it crashed directly into Caldwell's quiet, orderly life. His superiors, who had previously praised his adherence to protocol, were now fielding furious calls from ambassadors, senators, and celebrity philanthropists. He was summoned to a video conference with a grim-faced Undersecretary General in Geneva. "Arthur," the man said, his voice dangerously calm, "you have managed to turn a minor logistical issue into the single worst public relations disaster our organization has faced in a decade. You didn't just wipe your hands of a situation. You gave the world a villain to boo and a saint to worship, and you cast us as the villain. This needs to be rectified. Immediately." Caldwell, pale and sweating, could only nod. "What are your orders, sir?" "Your orders are to fix it. We are assembling a humanitarian convoy. Food, medicine, blankets, the works. And you, Arthur, are going to lead it. You are going to go into Viridia, you are going to find this nurse, and you are going to be photographed pinning a medal on her chest. We are reframing this. She is not a victim of our neglect. She is a hero we are honoring. We are not covering our tracks. We are celebrating courage. Is that clear?" It was a punishment disguised as a mission, a public act of penance. For Caldwell, the man who prized order and distance above all else, the thought of going into the war-torn city, of facing this woman, was a personal hell. But the alternative was the end of his career. Back in the Basilica basement, Alara knew nothing of this. She had made her choice. She split the vial of ceftriaxone, giving half to Anja and half to Stefan. It was a medically unsound, desperate move, likely too little to cure either of them, but she couldn't choose. She supplemented it with the expired amoxicillin and prayed. The following 2 days were a blur of sponging fevers, forcing water between cracked lips and waiting. On the third day, a new sound began. It wasn't the familiar roar of artillery or the crackle of small arms fire. It was a deep, steady rumble that grew closer and closer. The children, conditioned to fear loud noises, huddled behind her. Alara grabbed her heaviest wrench, her only real weapon, and stood at the top of the basement stairs, peering out into the courtyard. What she saw made her drop the tool with a clang. A convoy of pristine white trucks, their sides emblazoned with the bold blue letters UN, was carefully navigating the rubble-strewn street. They were real. They were here. A wave of dizzying, overwhelming relief washed over her, so powerful it made her knees weak. Tears streamed down her face, carving clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. They had come. Caldwell, someone, had listened. They were saved. The children, seeing her tears of joy, began to emerge from the basement, their faces filled with a cautious, wondrous hope. The lead truck, a sturdy armored SUV, pulled to a stop. The door opened. Alara's smile froze on her face. The relief curdled into ice in her veins. The first person to step out was not a doctor or a soldier. It was Arthur Caldwell. He was dressed in a crisp, spotless blue flak vest that looked like it had never been touched by dust. His hair was neatly combed. He was flanked by two people holding large television cameras. He looked around at the devastation with a carefully curated expression of grave concern, a look he had clearly practiced. He spotted Alara standing amidst the children. A broad, professional smile spread across his face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He began walking towards her, his polished boots crunching on the gravel. The children thought he was a savior. But Alara, staring into the face of the man who had denied her pleas and left them to die, knew she was looking at a monster wearing the mask of a hero. The convoy wasn't a rescue mission. It was a photo opportunity. The world seemed to slow down. The clicking and whirring of the cameras were unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet of the courtyard. The children stared, wide-eyed, at the procession. To them, these clean people emerging from their shiny white trucks were angels. To Alara, the scene was a grotesque parody of salvation. Caldwell stopped a few feet from her, his practiced smile firmly in place. He smelled faintly of expensive soap. It was the most jarringly out-of-place scent in a world that smelled only of decay, cordite, and sickness. "Ilara Vance," he began, his voice projecting for the cameras. It was the same sterile, detached voice from the phone, now coated with a thick veneer of public reverence. "I am Arthur Caldwell of the United Nations. I have followed your story. In a world too often darkened by conflict, your courage, your selfless dedication, has been a beacon of hope, an inspiration to us all." Alara said nothing. She simply stared at him, her face an unreadable mask of exhaustion and contempt. Her silence was a void that his platitudes could not fill. He faltered for a fraction of a second, unused to his script being met with such a profound lack of reaction. He cleared his throat and continued, holding up a flat, velvet-lined box. "Your defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, your commitment to the most vulnerable. It is the very embodiment of the principles upon which our organization was founded. And so, on behalf of the United Nations High Commission, it is my profound and distinct honor to present you with the Secretary General's Award for Gallantry and Humanitarian Service." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue velvet, was a heavy, gleaming gold medal. It caught the afternoon sun, a brilliant, almost obscene sparkle in the gray ruin of the city. This was the pinnacle of the rage bait, the ultimate, infuriating irony. The man who had condemned them, who had typed out their death sentence in a clinical email, was now standing before her, offering a piece of polished metal as if it could erase his sins. The audience in Alara's mind, the global audience that had forced this moment to happen, was surely screaming. They would want her to throw it in his face, to scream at him, to expose him for the soulless hypocrite he was. But Alara's anger was a cold, focused thing now, honed to a razor's edge. A public tantrum would make her look unstable, emotional. They would edit it to fit their narrative. She had a better weapon, the truth. Her gaze drifted past Caldwell, past the metal, to the long line of white trucks. Her eyes narrowed. She took a step forward, and the cameras zoomed in. Caldwell extended the box towards her. She ignored it. "Are they full?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, raw, and carried more power than any shout could have. It sliced through the staged ceremony, a question so unexpected and so practical that it shattered the entire performance. Caldwell was visibly thrown. He blinked, his smile faltering. I beg your pardon?" "The trucks," Alara repeated, her gaze locking onto his. "Are they full?" She took another step, forcing him to take one back. "Or did you just bring the cameras? Did you pack enough medals for all of us?" She gestured to the children who were now clustered around her legs, peering up at the strange man. "Because the girl in there, Anya, she can't eat a medal. The boy, Stefan, he can't use a ribbon as a bandage. So I'm asking you again. Are your trucks full of antibiotics? Of rehydration salts? Of infant formula and blankets? Or are they as empty as your words?" The question hung in the air, a devastating indictment. The journalists lowered their cameras slightly, sensing the shift from a canned PR event to a moment of raw, authentic confrontation. Caldwell's face, for the first time, lost its composure. A flush of angry red crept up his neck. He was being humiliated, outmaneuvered, on a global stage of his own making. Of course there are supplies, he stammered, gesturing vaguely towards the convoy. That goes without saying. Then nothing else needs to be said, Alara replied. She reached out and took the velvet box from his hand. She did not look at the metal. She turned to the nearest UN soldier, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable. Get your men. Start unloading. Food and medicine first. To the basement. She had seized control. The narrative was now hers. She had turned their weapon, the media, against them, transforming a publicity stunt into a public shakedown. Caldwell was left standing alone, rendered utterly impotent, the star of a show that had been unceremoniously cancelled. As the soldiers, now taking orders from Alara, began opening the rear doors of the trucks, a figure appeared at the edge of the courtyard. It was Dr. Tariq. He must have heard the rumble of the convoy. He looked at the trucks, at Alara commanding the soldiers, and at the humiliated Caldwell. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his bruised face. He walked over to Alara, shaking his head in disbelief. A miracle? He murmured. You found a miracle? No, Alara said, handing him a manifest she'd taken from a driver. I just sent a few emails. She turned her back on the courtyard spectacle and walked back toward the dark maw of the basement stairs. The velvet box was in her hand. She paused, opened it, and looked at the gleaming piece of gold. It meant nothing. It was just metal. She entered the quiet cool of the basement and walked over to Anja's cot. The girl's fever had broken. Her breathing was still shallow, but it was even. She was sleeping peacefully. Stefan, too, was stable. The split dose, the expired drugs, and Alara's sheer, stubborn will had held the line. Now, with the real medicine here, they would live. That was the award. That was the victory. Alara placed the medal, still in its box, on a dusty wooden crate beside Anja's bed. She picked up a damp cloth and began to gently wipe the sweat from the sleeping child's brow. The sounds from outside of soldiers unloading life-saving supplies under her direction were the only applause she needed. The forgotten medal caught a single beam of light filtering through the broken door, a silent, irrelevant testament to a battle that had been won long before the convoy ever arrived.